technically correct, but also not correct in a strategical way. In the beginning, I would like to use the takeaway message of one of men that I really respect, man from the Industry Association of the Republic, and in recent decarbonization ceremony in Prague, he used the takeaway message that EU decarbonization should not lead to EU industrialization. And I think this is a sentence that we all should agree. We all use chemicals on a daily basis. It has been said in the beginning. We all want to have and need to have, from geostrategical reasons, chemicals production as well in Europe, especially the lessons learned taken from the COVID and now with the war crisis. So we need to make sure that our chemical industry survives and at the end of the transition is stronger. And if we look on the facts, it's quite interesting, because we have 500, maybe a little bit more, 500 billion euro generated in revenues every year by chemical and related industry. This sector employs 1.2 million employees, and we definitely do not want to lose this economic momentum as well. On the other side, this has been said in the very beginning, that in EU we already have, I would say, most ambitious and most wide policies on climate and on control of chemicals. Despite the fact, I think 84% of EU citizens have some concerns about their exposure to chemicals and potential negative effects, and also I think 90% of citizens have concerns on the environment. So I mean, all of this together, it generates enormous momentum to go ahead with the transition, and it's only on us to do make the transition happen and do it in, I would say, clever way. And in order to do this, we must as well think about all the challenges that the sector as such is facing. We have a clear trend. The goal is, I would say, widely accepted. I have even feelings that most of the representatives of the sectors and related stakeholders are on board today. But if we oversee, and if we continue overseeing some important elements and challenges that are here in front of the sector, we could end up with the industrialization, and this is definitely not what we want to have. If you look on the challenges, it's, I would say, emissions reduction. Chemical industry as such is energy intensive usually. So the energy sector needs to be decarbonized. By the way, when we are talking about decarbonization of chemical industry, of course, we know here that the word decarbonization doesn't fit fully to chemical industry, because we will need to have a source of carbon always. So this is one of the challenges, to find source of carbon that will fit to the sustainable future. In the future, the sector will have enough, or not as many as now, free allocations. We'll need to face also some design changes, because it's a correct approach. To protect our citizens, we need to have a good design of the chemicals, that they are safe by design. But all these are challenges. And in Brussels, we add more. This corporate sustainability due diligence. This is something that will impact all companies, including the chemical sector. And if we, let's say, put all these challenges together, plus now the CLP and the REACH, you can really see that the the sector is extremely challenged. And the problem is that we could make it, but today I see too much ideology in the Brussels. It is about having policies, and we have the policies and interim goals that are, let's say, driven based on ambitions. Ambitions are fine, but ambitions must be as well realistic. And if technical aspects like taxonomy are captured by political ideology debate, then we are starting to have issues. And this is what happened, for example, with the first delegated act on litigation adaptation, which was used, for the energy sector. So the problem today is that if we have any legislation that is related to Fit for 55 or more concretely to, for example, chemical industry, we take every piece of the legislation and we try to be as fast as possible and the most ambitious as possible. And we just look particularly on that one legislation. Today we finished, we have ambitious deal. Tomorrow, next legislation, again, as ambitious as possible. Problem is that we are losing the wider picture, and I see it on much easier legislations than, for example, will be the REACH, revision of REACH and CLP. So this is also maybe my answer to question whether the revision of REACH should be subjected by the European Commission as soon as possible that the European Parliament, this European Parliament can work on it and maybe even conclude before the next elections. From the perspective of knowing the rules for the stakeholders, it would be nice, but I cannot much imagine it that within this basically less than 1 year, we would be able to have proper debate, and it would be risk. So maybe I'm in minority, but because I know that a number of my colleagues, especially in the Envy committee, they want to start as soon as possible. But I would really prefer to maybe start, but then continue mainly with the new parliament, and also maybe because the new parliament will reflect more recently the mood in the society, and I have some feelings that this only ideology-driven approach, which is good when you do some resolutions, you come to legislation, we really must be more realistic, maintain the direction, no one questions the direction, but we need to discuss together and understand each other. And I see it, for example, tomorrow we will vote on this fluorinated gases regulation, okay? It has been 1 year when first time someone knocked on my door. And it's compared to REACH, it's absolutely tiny regulation. And still we are super busy, and it's just, we are at the stage of having the parliamentary position. It's 1 year, for quite tiny, important, but compared to REACH tiny legislation. I cannot imagine that you would prefer speed up before the quality. Maybe I'm a minority. We will see how the European Commission will decide. It's on them. They have the ball in the hand. They are pressed by the European Parliament, by the Envy Committee. But we will see. With this approach, I would like to also accent that we oversee global reality. It's fine to work on mitigation, but I'm convinced, as a climate-friendly person, that the success of the question whether mitigation will be successful is in the hands of the biggest polluters, like India and China. Okay, so our policy making should reflect this. Maybe we shall also more adopt and use all adaptation technologies. With this, it's about technology neutrality. I think it's not, I will not use the name, but it's, the worst what I could see is that I visited an industrial chemical plant that had ambitions, but simply they were not technology was not the best technology that some guys in Sevilla outlined as the best one. And there was a big uncertainty whether they would be supported, would receive the funds, just because they do what they can. The other alternative is to build new factory, but they cannot with their processes to build something new, more than they can. But apparently it's not enough. So this is something that makes the people leave the mainstream, and finally they doesn't need to support the Green Deal. Technology neutrality is especially important as well in the energy. Energy is important for chemical industry. And I'm quite sad about the recent statements on the nuclear energy. I know it is a divisive topic, but if we mean seriously decarbonization and degrees of greenhouse gases, then this is a logical answer. And the risk that are here that can be managed. And if we invested the same to development of safeguards in nuclear as we invest to development and research in renewables, which are fine, nothing against them, it would be maybe a different scenario, and it would help the industry as such, but we don't maintain technology neutral approach. We also oversee additional aspects like regional aspects. It is nice to listen from some commissioners that if we use the best ambitions, we can attract the best, for example, specialists, and they can work in these new operations. But if we talk about chemical industry, often it's, not always, but often it's structurally affected region. I come from Karlovy region, which is structurally affected. It contains coal and chemical industry. And this region, despite some positive development, is still missing some basic services. To find a doctor for the child in the weekend, it's not so easy. So, what is the motivation of I would say, high-tech engineer to start working there? I don't think so. It's very difficult to attract. So at the end, our policy, if we want to be successful, must respect also regional specificities, and if there is if there are businesses in specific regions and want to go forward, we should support them as much as possible. And also related infrastructure development, because if you have no kindergarten, no school, no doctor, the young family will not move to that region. How do you want to make a successful transition of that region? Maybe last point, I don't want to speak long. The localization of chemical industry is already going on to some extent. I hope that it will be stopped soon, but it's true that I have witnessed that, for example, a Czech company moved to the US because of easier job market and also lower gas prices, which was not a typical case in the past. So we must be also as well very careful what we do with the energy market to stabilize the cost of energy, because this is crucial for chemical industry. At this stage, I would like to thank you, and once again thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kratek, for your intervention. There are some provocative ideas, so I suppose you will receive some questions during the discussion. So let me now welcome to the stage also Mr. Peter Korytar. I have already introduced you, also I'm going to do it just very quickly. So Mr. Korytar is representing European Commission, in particular DG Environment. He received he obtained the PhD in analytical chemistry from Free University in Amsterdam, and lately joined the DG Environment. During his career, he's dealing with REACH, and currently he's in charge of this revision. So please welcome on stage. Thank you. Start now. It's your turn, but if you want a couple of more minutes, we can have a
my introduction a little bit to complement a colleague is I have been in the DG environment for 14 years now, since 2008 in the chemicals unit mainly, and I am working and responsible for coordination of the activities on the chemical strategy for sustainability on one substance one assessment, and I'm a little bit working on the taxonomy regulation, and it's my pleasure to actually speak about it today a little bit to give you flavor. I think I'm here more for discussion than for speech, so I will just very briefly recap what is the taxonomy about, perhaps for those who doesn't know. So it's a regulation which tries to set the rules and the criteria for economic activities, whether they contribute substantially to contributing environmental objectives. And there are 6 objectives in the regulations. 2 are related to climate change, to climate adaptation, climate mitigation, and 4 are for the environmental objectives, so circular economy, water, pollution prevention, and biodiversity. So, as you know, the taxonomy as such regulation has been adopted some time ago, but what is the key issue of this is delegated acts and the specification of the technical criteria. So basically we go economic activity by economic activity and try to specify the criteria where we see that the activity is substantially contributing to these environmental objectives. There are 2 types of criteria which is important to keep in mind. One is the criteria for substantial contributions, so very, very green, so which really significantly contributes or substantially contribute to the environmental objectives. So that for activity to fulfill that has to fulfill those criteria, but at the same time it cannot cause significant harm to other environmental objectives. So if something is very good for the climate change, it cannot cause a significant harm, for example, for the biodiversity. So this is the whole concept of the taxonomy. So there are development of 2 types of criteria: do no significant harm criteria, as we call them, and substantial contribution criteria. So the criteria for climate change are out, I think, for 1 year. If I understood correctly, as of this year, they have to be reported on. The activities has to be screened against. And we are developing the criteria for environmental objectives. And you might have heard rumors. We are finishing, trying to discuss internally what the criteria will be. We've been supported in this work by the platform which the Commission established, where there were representatives from all the stakeholders, including the industry. Actually, many industry representatives were there. And we received recommendations, and based on the recommendations, we are drafting this delegated acts and technical screening criteria. So, I don't know whether you want to know something more about the chemical parts. Maybe the chemical parts, I will speak mainly on those which are adopted. So, in a no significant harm criteria, you know, we have this famous Appendix C, which is in the taxonomy regulation, and that actually excludes as a considers the criteria, the activities which significantly harm environment are mainly those which are not compliant with the EU legislation. So that's basically we are listing the POPs regulation, so all the substances which are on the POPs regulation regulated should not be be seen as a significantly harming the environment. Then there is a mercury regulation, there is a ROS regulation, and restriction, underage, and so on. Then there are 2 other ones which are a little bit more ambitious than the mere compliance with the existing legislation. So if the substance is meeting the criteria for substances of very high concern, it shall be not used unless it is essential for the society, or it is demonstrated to be essential for the society. So this is actually to implement the kind of the idea is that to avoid that we have regrettable substitutions. So because these regrettable substitutions are actually causing significant harm, the same like the original substance which is substituted for substance of very high concern, which has been identified subject to authorization, then this substance is an alternative, but it's an alternative only because it has not been yet identified as substance of very high concern, because it didn't pass through the regulatory process. That's why it is this condition. That we also see that we need substances of very high concern. That's why there is a derogation, because clearly in the process one thing is to talk about the consumer products, but the second thing is to talk about the production facilities. A lot of substances which are basic organic chemicals are substances of very high concern, and they are of course really to be essential from my perspective. So you can't replace them in the synthesis chain. And then we are developing, what I want to point out here, that it is important sometimes in this do no significant harm criteria, in my view, to refer to the existing legislation, because this do no significant harm criteria in principle applies also to the operations outside the EU. So you could see a little bit like trying to equalize the level playing field among the EU and outside the EU. The reason is that if a company is a global and has an operation outside the EU and wants to report activities under the EU taxonomy, they have to also count the activities outside the EU and they have to report them. So in this way you kind of try to enforce, push forward, promote the EU standard beyond the EU level and try to equalize the level playing field. Substantial contribution criteria, they are not yet out. We are still in the internal discussion, so I can't really much talk about it. I can maybe indicate you could see the recommendation from the platform about the chemicals. So I'm happy to discuss them here. I see that there is another speaker later indicating that it's what will be the consequences on the industry. I want to also point out one thing. One thing is a regulation, typical strong regulation restriction, like each of the regulation which ban thing. So it's really something which this is very strong, has a strong consequence, and it's applicable to everybody, to every firm. Then we have to think about taxonomy, eco-label regulation, for example, as well, but also taxonomy. It's not to mean that everybody needs to really be compliant with it. It is to indicate the activities which are substantially contributing to those activities. What I want to say, if some activity is not compliant with the substantial contribution criteria, it does not mean that it's absolutely has to be causing significant harm. There is a gray zone between the high ambition activities and the significant harm activities. So there is a gray zone. And also it does not mean that the activity has to be stopped, is forbidden, or there is a restriction. It just means that it's not compliant with taxonomic criteria and will not be eligible to the waste of green financing or wherever these taxonomic criteria are used. So I'm looking forward to discussion.
Thank you very much for this brief intro into taxonomy, which is for many real mistake. And I'll now pass the floor to Jan Merlak.
Good morning once again. I'm just curious what should I present after these four very nice presentations. So I will take it a little bit down to ground, because we are now in nice clouds of Commission and the European Parliament, and with all these bright ideas, ambitions, and so on. So I will put it down to the ground. Okay, next slide, please. Sorry, it's here. So I will talk about authorization. It's one part of the REACH, and it's also part of the REACH update. As it was already said by Karel and by Mr. Brontek as well. So what is the current status? Everybody knows that. I suppose you are familiar with authorizations. It's a tool, or it's a procedure for substances of very high concern to be identified and to be somehow catched by the system in order to keep them safe and keep them under control. So there are three phases how to deal with these substances under REACH. The first phase is identification with public consultations and with the candidate listing. So if any member states or commission propose any substance for inclusion on the candidate list, it must undergo this procedure. The second procedure is done in the member states committee. It's a prioritization, draft recommendation of substances and opinion of the member states committee. This is very important because as you are very well aware, I think, that there is an enormous amount of substances which fulfills the criteria in the Article 57, which was already mentioned, Article 57 by Karel, and I fully support that. And the Member States Committee has a very important role to prioritize these substances, which is now happening, and send them to the Commission. So when the opinion is done, the Commission is then make the decision on these substances and put them in the Annex 14. So Annex 14 is a authorization list. So then all the substances are there with the sunset date, with the application date, and with possible derogations as well, sometimes. So when all of this is happening, then it starts the term for industry. I mean the term in terms of dealing how to proceed with the authorization, because as we have heard already from Karel and the others as well, it takes some time, and also all these substances are used in industry in other ways. And I would like to quote Mr. Koritari here, because he was mentioning that there is a distance between the end use in the consumer product and with the substances which are used in the chemical synthesis as a monomers, for example, or whatever else. And these substances which undergo all the authorization process are mainly basic chemicals, which are not in the consumer product or are in the consumer product, but only as a, I don't know to say it's just a impurity, but okay, it's more or less in traces. Thank you. So the applicant here, or the company which wants to apply for authorization, is really, there is a big burden, as Karel said. It's a time, money, and effort-consuming process. And if you submit all the data, all the information, spend hundreds of thousands of euros for preparation, for consultants, and for the supply chain information and so on, then at the end you will get or not the authorization. So far, all applications except one were granted. So the only application was not granted so far. It's coincidentally the application which was submitted by our company, which was not granted. There are some arguments why it was not granted, but okay, it's how it is. But with the authorization, the whole story doesn't end. So far, it's end also with the review period and with the review report. So if the applicant wants to submit for another period, which was granted, they must submit the review report, document all the changes that they were done, and document the progress for finding alternatives, and so on. So it's never-ending story. So the ultimate aim of all of this is to find suitable alternative. So that's the current status. What the Commission proposes is a simplification. So there are at this moment three points three options how to do the simplification. Either is keeping the current structure, what I have just described of authorization, with only small changes, targeted ones. There is also another option, which was also mentioned here by Karel, that the authorization will be merged with the restriction, but there will be some kind of derogations which will undergo the authorization. The third option is the most drastic one. The Commission will just delete the whole authorization from the REACH regulation, and will only do the risk management via the decision process or the binding limit for OSH and industrial emission directive. So these three options really agree here with Mr. Blaha here. We would really, as an industry, we would like to stay with the option 1, so keeping the current status as it is now. The main reason is that it took a long time, and really, I mean the long time, when the information about REACH goes through the whole supply chain. I was very surprised that now in 2023, I have received from one of the downstream users question, what is REACH? We have received questionnaire and there is written that we have to comply with REACH. What does it mean? So the REACH was entered into force in 2008 and now we have 2023. So you can imagine that the whole procedure when it bubbles through the whole life cycle of the substance from the whole supply chain, it really takes a lot of time, and the SMEs, they don't even know now that the REACH exists. So if we will change now the procedure, and I mean the whole REACH, not only the authorization, but the whole REACH, and if we will introduce all new concepts and so on, it will create only a mess, especially at the small and medium enterprises. That's reality. So, what is the Commission proposing is that the substitution plan, which is by the way, even now in the authorization, you have to submit the substitution plan if you want to receive authorization. So, the Commission intends to increase the role of substitution plans in order to increase the substitution and also the use of the alternative substances or alternative technologies. That's another point I want to tackle. There are not only alternative substances, there are also alternative technologies which has to be taken into account. But of course we need a realistic time frame for this. And it's not 4 years as is now proposed by the Commission. So it was also mentioned here, it's an introduction of the essential use concept. Well, this could potentially give signals to companies and lead to investment security in a way. It may happen, but it really depends on the definition. I'm really curious how the definition, and that's maybe a question also to Mr. Politas, how the definition could look like. Maybe he is already aware of it, because he's in the middle of the acting of the Commission, so maybe he's already aware how it looks like, and I will be really excited to know something about it more in detail. Well, another point is the extension of a generic risk management approach. Well, that was not mentioned so far here, and it's very dangerous for chemical industry because so far we are dealing with substances of very, very high concern, SVHCs. But this graph goes to the substances of concern. So it's not anymore very high concern, it's just a concern. So the concern means that everything could be in concern. So that's how it is, and that qualify all the classified substances to be put in these substances of concern. So Commission is working on the plan. Maybe also Mr. Politas knows something about it. I will be really very excited to know more details. So far what we have in the industry is just a bits and pieces of everything, because at any moment anything can appear, could be leaked from the Commission, could leak from the European Parliament, could leak from Krakow for whatever sources, and there are also only bits and pieces of information. And the whole picture, how the REACH review looks like, right? How the REACH update looks like, we don't have so far. First, last slide, I would like to, because it was mentioned from all the presentation here, I would like to mention is the difference between authorization and restriction. Because I have a feeling that it's very often mixed up, as also Mr. Notek told it, there is a mixing up with these two terms in the Parliament, in the Commission, and so on. So authorization, as I have described already, is just a process. It's just a process of identification of substances of very high concern and how to deal with them, and it's up to industry to deal with these substances in a way. And the Commission will decide it after all. On the other side, on the contrary, restriction is something, it's a plain text. It's Annex 17 of REACH, it's a plain text. You can write there anything you want. The Commission can write there any sentence, can write there anything. So anything what is there, the substance is immediately banned for this use or for displacing on the market or even for manufacturing or for whatever. So it's just a plain text. So there is a big danger. On one side, it's very easy for Commission just to put a plain text and put it in the restriction, but on the other hand, the consequences are quite hard for the industry because they have to deal with that, and the substance is banned for example. So this is a big difference. Authorization is now, I can say, after these almost 15 years of REACH, I can say that we in industry have handled somehow with the authorization. So it's managed. It's costly, it's time consuming and whatever, but we have managed to cope with that, to submit applications, also to deal with the implications, with all the aims that the Commission have. We can deal with that. But the restriction is something we cannot anyhow influence. Okay, there are public consultations, but very often when I am submitting my input to public consultation, the only answer I receive is thank you for your comments. Well, this is nice to receive thanks, that's clear, but not in this way. A more thorough discussion on the restriction would be needed. But this is not how it is working now. So thank you, this is the end of my presentation. Hopefully you enjoyed it as well, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mervat, for your intervention. You already posed a couple of questions for the discussion, but before we move to the discussion, I will ask now Mr. Branislav Březný to take.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. So I would like to come with a slightly different view on the taxonomy issue, which will come from the industry. And well, my presentation didn't meant to be very technical, but I just can't avoid being a bit technical. But don't worry, I will provide some examples, and I will try to make the topic as clear as possible. So thanks to Mr. Korikar, I don't need to go through all the presentation, all the stuff about the taxonomy introduction. But what I would like to say is what is our view on when the economic activity is not aligned with the taxonomy. It doesn't mean then, it means definitely negative perception of the company, of the image of the company. Of course, it will bring lower interest of the investors for the company. So it will very likely bring difficulties with the financing, with the investment financing, with the operational financing, with stock value and so on. All in all, this will be kind of threat to the industry. So well, I can skip those slides because it was actually mentioned. Well, but I would like to speak about this document which has been issued in October 2022, and this is the document of the platform of sustainable financing. The document actually comes with two parts. The very first one is the part which sets the methodology or proposes the methodology for so-called enabling activities, and it admits that the purpose of the document is not to provide the companies with the guidance how to self-assess, how to provide a self-assessment. However, it brings the guidance for the members of the platform and for the European Commission how to develop the criteria. So we know this is not not settled down, but we would like to discuss these in advance before it actually has been settled down. And also there is this part B, which is about kind of additional technical screening criteria that would be defined for those environmental objectives that have not been published via delegated acts so far. So, couple of words about the enabling activities, and here we go with the definition, which is not very easy, and I need to read it because I cannot say it from the top of my head. So, this is an activity contributing substantially to environmental objectives by directly enabling other activities to make substantial contribution to one or more of those objectives. Well, so it's about the activities that make other activities possible to make the contribution. And well, the activity should not lead to a lock-in of assets that undermine the long-term environmental goals. It has to have a substantial positive environmental impact, and very important thing, there will be KPIs, key performance indicators, reported, and they will follow the same rules as for our performance activities. So let's come with some example, because the definition was probably too difficult. We can think of the rotor blades of the wind turbines. So we know the target is to produce electricity, energy via wind turbines. We need to have the rotor blades to make the turbines and then to produce the electricity. Since the energy generation from wind turbines makes substantial contribution by definition, and since the blades are one of the components that are instrumental for generating electricity, this kind of activity can be classified as an enabling activity. I'm mentioning it just for you to understand what the enabling activity could be. Another example, vehicle tires. So the target are electric vehicles. We do want to use electric vehicles that do not produce any emissions in riding. There is direct link from tires to vehicles, but there are also different kinds of vehicles, not only the electric vehicles, and also those other kinds, like for example, internal combustion engines, they use tires. So tires are used also for the vehicles we do not want to have in the future. Together with some other circumstances, tire production will not be an enabling activity. So this is not my perception, this is the example which was already mentioned in the document. So what are the consequences? This economic activity, I mean production of tires, it will have negative KPIs. As I mentioned, it will have negative impact on the producer's image, perception, and of course on financing. But well, tires are a product of essential use. We will not stop using tires just because they are not enabling activity. We cannot stop it, so we will use the tires also in the future. So the tires production in Europe will be jeopardized, definitely. Tires will be produced in places with the most, the best conditions for production. So these might be the consequences. So the competitors from the third countries will have much better conditions for production of the tires. And the industry can be threatened. So this is for the enabling activities. And now I would like to speak about these additional criteria, and I'm not going to go through all of them. But well, there is a set of criteria for substantial contribution to one of the objectives, which is pollution prevention and control. So the definition says that the activity, the economic activity, must comply with two sets of criteria. Criteria A, that are mostly about the properties of the chemicals, and criteria B, that are mostly about the emissions being produced when producing those chemicals. Actually, when speaking about the group A, and let's say the criteria A1, the chemical being produced should not be hazardous, should not have negative impact on the health. This sounds right? No. I mean, chemicals are hazardous to people if they get in contact with people. And chemicals are hazardous and dangerous for the environment if they get into contact with the environment. But chemical industry is under super strong regulation just in order to avoid any negative impact into the people, into the environment. And most of the chemicals, as it was already mentioned, they do not end up into final products. So first they are handled by the trained personnel who know what to do and how to do, and they do not end up in the product. So the normal users, they do not get into contact with those chemicals. So this is my view on it, that when we suppress production, not ban, but suppress the production and use of the chemicals, it is like when we ban fire for being dangerous. Fire can harm people, fire can damage properties, but we use it because we need it and it's essential. So as chemicals are in the modern life. And also, considering chemicals to being harmful, by definition, irrespective of the measures that are applied by production, this is to me insane approach. So let's make a very quick assessment of production of the nitric acid. So there is this criteria A1 which says the production of the produced substance is not fulfilling any hazardous properties. It should not be in the list of the hazardous classes, and also it cannot have acute toxicity on the health. But nitric acid it is toxic if inhaled. It cannot cause the severe eye damage, but it causes serious eye damage. It cannot cause skin corrosion, and it causes severe skin burns and eye damage. But we use 28 million tons of nitric acid a year around the world. We produce fertilizers. If we don't have fertilizers, we are short in food, and there is a famine. If we don't have nitric acid, we do not produce explosives, and we cannot defend ourselves from the aggressor. We cannot produce pharmaceuticals, no ibuprofen. We cannot produce rubber chemicals, polyurethane. We cannot produce nylon and many other stuff. So is there an alternative for nitric acid in these days? No, it isn't. It will be used, so it will be produced, and it might be produced somewhere else, not in Europe. Probably with stronger or negative impact to the environment. And this is how we produce nitric acid in Europe comparing to the world. These are the emissions of greenhouse gases in Europe, very right side. The emissions are 0.1. Comparing to US, they produce 12 times more emissions. Or comparing to Russia, they produce 24 times more emissions. So there are also criteria B, and I don't want to spend too much time on it because this might be quite demanding to follow it. But I would like just to stop by the criteria B2, which says if it is technically possible, we should provide continuous monitoring of emissions if we apply this measure and these techniques to all points of release of the emissions, no matter how much they affect the environment, this is kind of wasting the money. But sources are never endless, so we need to use sources wisely. If we spend our sources on the measures with low contribution to the environmental protection, we don't have enough money for another measures that can bring much higher contribution. So my consequences would be that the majority of the chemical production will not comply with this kind of criteria. And the aligning with the criteria will push the producers to invest irrespective of the contribution to the environment. And of course, the activities that are not taxonomy aligned, they will suffer financially and otherwise. And we don't have alternatives for most of the chemicals we use now. And it might happen that the chemicals for European market will be produced outside of Europe, not because they would be banned, but because the conditions and circumstances will be better elsewhere. So what is at stake? It's chemical industry in Europe. What is at stake? There are some quotations from the official European documents, and some of the numbers have already been mentioned. So very quickly, the chemical sector has a strong role in the European economy, and most of the goods manufactured in Europe, they actually rely on chemicals. And EU27 is the second largest chemical producer in the world, and the chemical industry in the EU is fourth largest industry. 50 billion in sales, it was already mentioned, which is, by the way, 7% of manufacturing output by turnover. The number of employees was already mentioned, but also the labor productivity in the sector is 67% higher compared to the manufacturing sector, to the average of the manufacturing sector. So, European chemical industry is a world leader in carbon footprint reduction and the environmental impact. We definitely produce in the most possible, technically possible and economically possible way we can. And jeopardizing the European chemical industry will have consequences to the environment. And of course, like when speaking about the criteria, it is impossible to change the status of the compound. I mean, if we want to reduce carbon footprint and we have enough money, enough time, and enough energy, we can in theory do it. But we cannot make the nitric acid which doesn't harm your eyes. This is its intrinsic property. And the modern society just cannot live without the chemicals, even the hazardous ones. And the society will continue using chemicals, but they may be produced elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Březný, for a compelling presentation. We now move to the discussion. We have roughly 20-25 minutes for the discussion, for questions and opinions. I would like to ask you, when you're asking the question, please introduce yourself and disclose which institution or company you represent. So, is there any question? Yeah.
Do you have a mic or no? You can hear me. No, can you hear me? Okay, good. It's actually well, first, thank you very much to the Czech firm rep. I'm Antoine Hoxa, Director General of Fertilizers Europe, so representing fertilizer and ammonia industry. And I want to thank the Czech firm rep for organizing this, because this is a very important topic, not only for the Czech industry, we've seen here representatives, but also for the European industry. And my point is linked But before that, I wanted to say to Mr. Knodek, I very much appreciated all what I heard. Decarbonization should not lead to deindustrialization. We should avoid ideological debates and technology neutrality. So it's a shame I cannot vote for you. Coming to the point, actually I want to follow up a bit on what Branyo presented here with nitric acid, because nitric acid is an element for making ammonium nitrate, that is fertilizer, and if nitric acid does not comply with the taxonomy rules, it will be penalized. On the other hand, another fertilizer, which is in a way competitor to ammonium nitrate, is urea. It's a good fertilizer, but it has a significantly higher environmental impact, cannot be decarbonized because it has the CO2 in its molecule, so always will have a CO2 footprint. Ammonium nitrate doesn't have it. And if we strictly follow what the platform has suggested, then we will penalize the product that we think has the future. Of course, it's not banning, I understand that, but taxonomy is for allocating resources, allocating money, and we would push the money towards products that we really don't think are the good products in the long term. So this is the problem I have, and I think we need to think together how we can find a solution to this. Is it possible that Commission would not follow 100% the recommendations of the platform, or how can we find a solution to these sort of situations? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So, to answer simply, yes, it's possible that we will not follow the recommendation. But the problem is more complex here, because this is all, I listened to the presentation and I have received several comments like that. We need to look on a little bit. First, we need to clarify what is the purpose of the taxonomy classification. What is it and what is it not? So if you don't comply with the criteria of substantial contribution, in my house reading, it doesn't mean that you are not sustainable. It means that you are not substantially contributing to those environmental objectives. And I think this has to be clarified. That's what I try to say, that there is a gray zone. There is supposed to be whole activity on this gray zone between the activities which are substantially contributing and those which cause significant harm. So I have a sympathy for your plea that it will harm on your on the reputation and so on. I can understand it. The other thing what is important to see that compliance with taxonomy regulation does for chemical industry does not mean that you have to comply potentially only with the chemical criteria. As you know, for example, in the currently already adopted delegated act for climate change, there is an activity of organic basic chemicals. There are, I think, 15 organic basic chemicals, and those are actually substances of very high concern, some of them, because it has been recognized that these substances will have to be produced. So there are conditions set what should be the CO2 emissions during this production. So there if that activity is brought in line with that, there will be substantially contribution to CO2 because there are basic chemicals which are used for the manufacturing. I don't know whether the nitric acid is there, I would say no. Maybe ammonia might be there. I don't know by heart, but you might know. Then there is another whole activity about production of batteries. There you have also, when you have discovered, the whole activity covered all production lines. So including production of chemicals necessary for that. So it does not mean that chemical industry has to comply with only this one criterion here, you know, which it potentially will be developed or proposed by the Commission. I don't want to defend the proposal from platform, but we don't have the Commission position on this yet. So I just want to tell you that I followed the discussions in the platform, and the objective was, because it's very difficult, so the discussion was that it's very difficult to set the criteria for chemical sector because it's very broad, very diverse. It's much easier to go have sector by sector, you know, when you have a manufacturing of cosmetic, for example, detergent or cosmetic, you can be much more specific. You can make a derogations for things which you know that are essential that you cannot leave without. But for whole chemical, it's very difficult to do this. Huh? So the idea, what was taken by the platform, was to define, to promote the substitution to the best of the chemicals possible. So that was the whole point of this criteria. So it was the best in class. There are different types of criteria, but these are considered to be the best in class criteria. So to promote those substitutions, because we have very much examples from the past that there is a producer of an alternative, for example, for PFAS substances, for impregnating the waterproof jacket and whatever. But the person cannot break through because there is a production of PFAS where you have a big company producing big quantities, and he will never attract attention. So these people calls for the restriction of the substance to have a market open. The question is, if this person, imaginary now, is able to demonstrate all those conditions which are said, in my view, this would be eligible for this kind of green financing to promote this, to get investment into this substitutes. So this is how I understand the criteria which were drafted and proposed. That's why I think it was also this idea there to demonstrate that this alternative to something which is more harmful and so on. So, what I want to say that this is one way how to go about this. You have to look on a whole different sets of criteria which are not only about chemicals. You have to look at where else you can be also eligible. The other thing is that if we are adopting or we would go for this criteria on chemicals, I explain you the logic to try to be best in class and promote the substitutes, the one. The other way would be to actually develop another enabling technologies, but then you have to be more specific. What are the enabling technologies in the chemical sector? I have got a suggestion that all chemicals are used, which are used for the production of any other activity or in other activity of the taxonomy. I think that's a little bit too broad because it's just mere fact that somebody is using chemical to produce the blades. I don't think so as to be automatically eligible for a taxonomy compliant. I don't think so it's substantial contributing so much. It doesn't really make much change for the society now. But it could be, there are examples, there can be a different catalysts which reduce CO2 emissions, for example. There can be enzymes, for example, which were suggested sometimes to actually reduce the use of energy with washing and so on. So there is a possibility to, but there has to be a bright idea, and I have to say there is not many ideas coming even from the chemical industry. I mean, how the criteria, what could be good fun, what should be technologies to promote? It can be also the technologies like, I mean, chemical leasing. Is this something to be explored? Should it be supported, or is not such a good idea? It's not such an enabling technology. So there is a lot of possibilities, but honestly, when the platform was developing, there was not much coming in, whether it was public consultation, whether it was the members in the group. So this is what it comes. Huh? So this is how I see it.
Maybe also very shortly react. I would say that the truth is somewhere in between, and I would like to, let's say, accent that the European Commission in the beginning created a poster. I couldn't find it online, but I can recall some of the statements, what is and what is not taxonomy. And really, the proposals in the beginning is, this is not a mandatory list of investing in. This is not, it doesn't mean that if you are not listed, you are not green. It doesn't mean that if you are not listed, you are necessarily not sustainable. Okay? So in this, up to this, it's okay. It's true. But the problem started, and this is what I mentioned in my speech, how this technical tool, how then legislators work with such tool. And immediately when it was clear that there is a proposal on sustainable finance, so we started to use reference to taxonomy or part of its elements, mainly the Article 17 do not significantly harm criteria, in other legislation. European Regional Development Fund, for example, Just Transition Fund. When we go to this company sustainability reporting, banks reporting to ECB and so on, basically we end up with the taxonomy as a cut-off criteria, which was not the idea of the Commission, but the way how it is used will end up how our colleague explained, that those that are not classified classified, and I know that there are different classifications. I will not speak in technical detail. Those that are simply not in the best criteria, they will be punished somehow. So, good idea, but bad performance. Thank you.
Sorry, I may comment on it because it was here mentioned also twice about the gray zone. I would like to explain why we would like to have our economic activities aligned with taxonomy, so the green light, so sort of. This is a very difficult topic, and the perception of the topic by the ordinary people who are not familiar with this very difficult topic, I'm afraid they are not going to recognize between the green and gray and with something which is not aligned with the taxonomy at all. Well, I think the effect and the consequence will be that the investors there will go for the full alignment with taxonomy. That's why.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting panel discussion so far. My name is Crystal Ons. I am with FICA, that's the European Adhesion and Adhesive and Sealant Association. And my question is about SMEs. So adhesive and sealants, we are not chemical industry, but we do use chemicals. So we are mixtures somewhere in the middle of the value chain. And with the polymers requiring registration, so our companies will become registrants for the first time. So until now they just passed on the information. And we do worry about the SMEs in the sense that our industry, we have large companies, but the vast majority are SMEs in Europe. And that will mean a lot of work, additional burden. So for example, we're advocating for some exemptions and et cetera, et cetera. So what is your viewpoint on SMEs in this, in the reform language?
Have you addressed to someone specific or?
I think there are 3 or 4 people who give their views.
Thank you. If I understood, and I hope I did understood your question, you are concerned about the essential users in that process. Is that correct?
Well, generic risk approach is a concern, essential use is a concern, polymers requiring registration is a concern. Sorry. So in the example of the rotor blades, for example, sealants are essential in the production of the rotor blades. So just to say, to give an example.
Well, that's why I want to thank you for that question, because that's exactly the point we have, several of us have mentioned. The essential uses, as they are understood now, are not defined yet, which doesn't make any harm at the moment. It will make harm once it's adopted as it stands, like 2 words. In this morning, on the Caracol meeting, once the Commission has presented the basic features of that REACH provision, said that the intention is that the Commission will have simply the right to lay down the essential uses. And this is something at least troublesome, if not dangerous. We already briefly described our framework directive. This is one of the basic elements we disagree at the moment. Because I can compare it with the changes in the classification, with the introduction of new harmful features, intrinsic features, and other characteristics. These things are good, because the more we know about possible adverse effects, the better. But it cannot be applied mechanically to the other elements of the process. If somebody arbitrarily decides that this is essential, it may mean that the defined as very dangerous, cannot be a part of the process. Both approaches are not correct. I will hesitate to say that. It has been mentioned by the last speaker with the red sentence on the last slide. And I would refer to the man who lived already in the 16th century, whose name was Paracelsus. He said, and it's recorded, it's documented in one of his books, that every substance is dangerous. Every substance is toxic. Depends only on the dose, as he has said, and he meant it in the terms he had available. We now have war. We know, for instance, that some adverse effects are not directly dose dependent. But the basis remains the same. Even the most dangerous substance could be used safely if it comes to it. And everyone knows that uses of such, let's say, very difficult, I want to avoid now the word dangerous, difficult substances should be under the conditions which eliminate the possible adverse effect to any possible extent. But it doesn't mean that if we simply say we are banning that use, we are that much safer, because the substance may exist anyway. Typical example of many alkaloids in plants. These substances are very toxic. Everyone knows that. The plants are producing them to defend themselves. But they have many uses in pharmacy, in medicine, and in other chemical processes. And they can be used. So I'm not really sure. I understand, I have full understanding for the problems of SMEs. That's used very often and it's perfectly understood by all regulators. But it's easy for a big company. It's more difficult for the SMEs.
Perhaps to extend on my question, when it comes to polymers in the adhesive and sealant production, there are thousands and thousands of tweak one element in the chain and you have a different polymer. So you will have like dossiers and dossiers and dossiers. So that's, it's massive.
Yes, ma'am. If you could have listened what I heard this morning, you will understand that I have exactly the same feeling. Again, if I go to the details, it will take 1 hour. And I could not do that because there was not the introduction of the legal text. It was the introduction of, so I would call it basic ideas. Now, even those basic ideas are in many cases going the wrong way. In speaking for the Government Authority of the Czech Republic, even if I leave my office by the end of this year, I hope that someone who will take over looking at those principles. It doesn't, of course, not mean necessarily that it will succeed, because the opinions are different. I understand what it does. And the program with the polymers, that's why, that's why. During the negotiations, in the very beginning, I have been a member of the negotiating group of the European Council. But before we became EU members, I've been invited as the observer, as the expert. I could speak, but I could not be a part of the decision. It happened only when we became the European Union members. But this was the basic idea. We suggested 2 basic things: exclude polymers and exclude waste of any kind. No one until now, I'm very happy, did not suggest to include waste to the REACH. brings another problem, that the interface between the waste legislation and chemicals legislation is very, very, very hard and very difficult in many instances. But the polymers were excluded. There was a good agreement on it. But they still don't understand why this is so important issue at the moment. Someone wants to do it.
No, I just want to react to some of the issues because it looks very negative, the impression I'm getting about the Commission here. I want to see, I would like to say that I agree that the dose makes the poison. So, but we also have to recognize that there are substances which are more toxic than the other ones. So there are more adverse effects which society cares more, and those are the carcinogenic substances, toxic to reproduction substances, the substances which stays in the environment forever, get to your drinking water, and we will never be able to filter them out because they are soluble and mobile. And now the question is, yes, we can use them safely in some applications. I can agree to that. The question is, do we have resources in the member states and in the Commission, in the EU, to go use by use assessment whether this is safe? We don't. That's why we go for the GRI approach. That's why we have the policy of the, trying to phase out the use of substances of very high concern. And it is also the political choice. What level of protection you want? Isn't it a justified policy goal that if you can avoid the carcinogenic use of substances, why we should not do it? Just because in one application somewhere might be used, but to carcinogen you need to produce, there will be always some kind of potential exposure. So I do not think that the policy which is now implemented in REACH to actually phase out the substance of very high concern, which is in a certain way a GRI approach for the substance of very high concern, it's so unreasonable. I think it can be also very useful for the SMEs in principle, because it will be very straightforward. And I don't want too much defend the REACH here because I'm not a REACH specialist, and essential use I am far from that, so I don't want to dive into that. I just feel that to have a that I want to say that the policy is a little bit of policy choice, what level of protection you want to grant, and also that we do not have resources to assess use by use. That's why we actually make the reverse burden of proof, to put it on the industry, but also to say that the worst chemicals we want to phase out. And I want to make also correction which Mr. Merwak has presented, that basically the GRI approach is not for the all hazardous substances, it's only for the most harmful substances, which are a little bit broader group than substances of very high concern. And it's smaller than substances of concern. So it's SVH6 plus two other hazard classes. So there is not always how unreasonable the Commission is in its thinking. It's more, there is more nuances to it.
Just, I have to say that I've never said that the Commission was unreasonable. I've never said I disagree with REACH. This is my lifetime hobby. As I said, since 2001 here in Brussels, and I attended the famous meeting of two commissioners who had promised the European Union they will replace dozens of directives on chemicals with two basic regulations. And there was absolutely clear that's not going to happen beyond two regulations anymore. But the agreement aside, I've never said that the provisions embedded in REACH are incorrect. Quite opposite. This is the best we have ever had. That's why today I am hesitant to agree with major provisions unless the provisions are, say, supported, really supported. I also said I will need a couple of months to study carefully the recent proposal when it comes to the table concerning polymers, among other things, because there will be there. And at the moment, I have to say I'm not really in favor of that proposal. That's the only criticism I have.
We have time for... Yeah.
shortly to reflect the SMEs. Maybe this is the reason why I was considering that we shall wait the parliamentary work for the next period, because in Parliament, especially in European Parliament, the role of SMEs is always European Parliament wants to be kind of a bodyguard of SMEs, and always MEPs welcome to meet small businesses, but they are kind of handicapped, the SMEs, because if there is such a big proposal, usually the big players, they have their regulatory departments and it's fine, but in small groups, small companies, they have not these possibilities. So it takes time to them to first understand what's going on, where are the risks, what's good, what's bad from their point of view. So therefore more time is needed to them to reach MEPs. And it happened to me a few times within these 4 years in the European Parliament that the company approached me, but it was already too late. The process was in other stage. And it's also that they don't know the process of Brussels, because it's quite complicated and quite bureaucratic and so on. So this is the reason why for such critical legislation we should have more time, even though that the sector needs, let's say, stability, know the rules, but if we create rules, we must go slowly. And in Parliament we are thinking something, and maybe I will ask my colleague to hold the table. I don't know whether this will be put to mandatory, but something like SME stress test, that every piece of legislation would be mandatorily assessed by the Commission for the impact on SMEs. I don't think that it is in the capacities of the Commission to do it for all legislations, but maybe for some major one, it could be a good point. But I understand that also the resources of the Commission are limited, and you cannot do everything what the European Parliament just thinks that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you. I see there are still a couple of questions. Unfortunately, we have to finish the meeting, but there will be still time to discuss in informal setting after this meeting. So thank you very much for the lively and interesting discussion. As I said, I would like to conclude with the official part of the workshop, which is closing the remarks by Mr. Ivan Solček, Director of the Association of the Chemical Industry.
I have also prepared some presentation, but I am not going to go through all of it because my main aim of contribution was to make some summary. And also here I should say that having last statements of representative of the Czech Ministry of Environment, of the representative of European Commission, of the member of European Parliament, and two representatives of industry, seems to me that there are not so much to add, because I believe that the aim of this meeting really was fulfilled by exchanging opinions between those main stakeholders and appreciating also you all, our audience, accepting invitation to share with us some of your view, and also be part of the discussion what you have heard here. I maybe shortly only align the fact that the topic what was discussed here, either taxonomy or REACH, is today part of the new document which was issued in the end of January called Chemical Industry Transition Pathway. And just a reminder that also regulatory component is part of this document, which I am not going to develop so much in details. And also highlighting that this document consists of 26 topics, areas to be, let's say, guideline for
was discussed here. What I would like also to mention that the expected content of REACH update or revision is really very tough task. I remember discussion with Mr. Baha when the first proposal and frame of REACH was developed. It spent many months of a large group of experts of European Union to develop this frame, and it definitely would be not easy to make its revision. Recognizing and like several people said here, the current frame, in our view, is sufficient and is well regulating the chemical industry already. Just also highlighting the aim of this meeting and some initiative when we as Chemical Association of Czech Republic were encouraged to organize this meeting, inviting yourself, inviting the key stakeholders for this discussion. And we were inspired by our new president, which by the way was elected or was coming into seat at the beginning of this month, who highlighted that also smaller countries might be heard and respected within the discussion of members of European Unions, not necessarily to be the only greatest company. And we believe also that, like Czech Republic, there are majority of countries of European Union who are the same size and who can share our opinion. So this is why we were here, and we believe that something which was discussed here will be heard and hopefully will be used in future development of the European legislation. Something which was not mentioned by some of presenters today is the status of chemical industry. We heard the numbers, we heard the size, we heard the position of European chemical industry, but what was important information not mentioned here, that the last year, and in particular last quarter of last year, was the first time in history of European Union where we were trade balance deficit. So first time when imports to the European Union was larger than European